Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
This is the Daily Memphian Politics Podcast. I'm Bill Dries. The main event, Memphis City Council member Martavius Jones on consolidation, redistricting, and no more council super districts. Can it be? Top of the podcast as we record on a Thursday. Rumors City Council member J.B. Smiley Jr. is considering a bid in next year's Democratic primary for Tennessee governor. This coming from some of those he has reportedly talked to this past week about the possibility. Smiley is not commenting so far, and there is no paperwork filed with the state at this point, so it appears he really is thinking about this and not just biding his time to a formal announcement. Smiley is in his first term on the council, elected to a superdistrict seat in 2019, a year after he ran unsuccessfully in a Democratic primary for a county commission seat. Smiley keeps his council seat if he runs, since city offices are not on the ballot again until 2023. If he runs and if he wins next year, there's a vacancy on the council starting in the city election year. But let's not get too far ahead on this. Smiley is pondering the governor's race the same week that Dr. Jason Martin of Nashville was doing a multi-day fly-around to the state's major cities, formally launching his bid in the 2022 Democratic primary. North Memphis activist Carnita Atwater is already declared in the Democratic primary, as well as Casey Nicholson of Greenville. Curtis Carney of Cottonwood, a former Sumner County police officer, military veteran, and owner of Nashville's Off the Wagon Tours, a party bus business, is challenging Governor Bill Lee in the Republican primary. Carney painting Lee as soft on pandemic restrictions Carney has been vocal about opposing in Nashville. That includes Facebook posts calling for no health mandates of any kind and pointing to provisions in the state's emergency order allowing for the rapid construction of testing and vaccination sites that Carney interprets as allowing concentration camps. The Shelby County Commission continues to go back and forth on what must have seemed like a simple idea at the outset, an ethics advisory board appointed by the commission to advise it on the mayor's nominees to the County Ethics Commission, a separate body. Well, then, a substitute version of the ordinance shows up at the commission when the resolution is to be voted on. The Blue Ribbon Advisory Board would also offer advice to the county commission on any changes to the county's ethics ordinance, like, say, the changes County Mayor Lee Harris intends to propose that he talked about on this podcast a while back. Then Harris vetoed the measure, the Blue Ribbon Advisory Panel, that is, saying it violates the county charter and that the commission should not be messing with ethics standards and rules while Commissioner Edmund Ford Jr. is being investigated by a special prosecutor. That would be the $450,000 grant in 2019 to Junior Achievement that Ford sponsored but did not vote on, recuse himself on, or declare any potential conflict of interest on. The special counsel appointed by the county attorney's office concluded there was a conflict of interest and a violation of county ethics rules since Ford sold Junior Achievement $45,000 worth of computer equipment after the grant vote. Ford has denied any wrongdoing. The special prosecutor, a different position and a different review that could include criminal charges, is still investigating this as we record. Now, because Harris mentioned Ford by name in the veto letter, Ford brought up an ethics complaint against Harris, and the commission overrode Harris's veto. Two people filed ethics complaints against Harris in February, alleging that he and County Attorney Marlene Iverson violated the county charter in 2020 by awarding a $1 million marketing contract to Red Rover for a masking ad campaign without county commission approval. The Daily Memphian got the complaints through an open records request of county government. Back to 2020, the county commission voted down the contract with Red Rover. Harris's administration said it did not need commission approval for the CARES Act funding and went ahead with it anyway. The special counsel appointed to review the two complaints about the contract concluded in April there was no violation of the charter or the ethics policy and thus nothing to pursue further. Think the county commission is through with the Blue Ribbon Advisory Panel? No. It turns out legally and by the advice of its attorney, the county commission had to amend the resolution to make the panel a temporary or ad hoc group with terms of its members of 2 years, not the original 4 years. And the ad hoc group's advice goes to the Ethics Commission first, then the commission and the mayor. There might be more to come on this. Germantown aldermen get a briefing on the new consolidation attempt that we will be talking about in more detail in just a bit. Germantown Mayor Mike Palazzolo, who was an alderman during the 2010 attempt to combine the Memphis and Shelby County governments, says put him down as against it. He also says he's had little contact with those behind the current effort, which at this stage is just to get a charter commission up and running and drafting a blueprint for a consolidated government. Also part of the discussion, as reported by our Abigail Warren, Pat Hardy of MTAS, the University of Tennessee's Municipal Technical Advisory Service Group, and several interesting numbers here from Hardy. The number of local governments across the U.S. has decreased by around 31,800 in the last 40 years, and most of that is school boards consolidating. Over those 4 decades, nearly 2,500 general-purpose governments have consolidated or combined. Most of them are city governments. And Hardy says it's more common nationally for local governments to talk about consolidation and study it than to actually go through with it. And finally, a miscount. It turns out there will be at least 6 new Shelby County commissioners elected in the 2022 elections, not 7 by my previous count. 5 term-limited commissioners and Commissioner Tammy Sawyer, who has announced she will not be seeking a second term on the body. So again, 6 new faces guaranteed on the 13-member body, 1 short of a majority of 7. And by my new and correct math, you will remember that in the 2018 elections, 8 new commissioners were elected to the body, meaning 5 returning members for a second term, thus providing another check on my math that I just blew right by. Yes, I regret the error. Joining us now is Memphis City Council member Martavius Jones, and consider this a companion to our earlier podcast with fellow council member Chase Carlisle on the latest bid for consolidation of city and county governments. As we record this, we are about a week past the council's first discussion of this push as a group. Councilman, you were for consolidation during the 2010 effort. You were even a plaintiff in the federal court lawsuit over how the votes were counted on the ballot question, which we'll get into later. But at the top of our discussion, what about this time around? Where do you stand on this?
I'm keeping an open mind about this bill. I don't want to say that my opinion on this is against it, but I still want to hear how does this benefit the city of the average person who lives in the city of Memphis. I'm open to hearing those arguments, hearing both sides of the discussion, but I think that at this point, I would have to be convinced that it's beneficial for most of Memphis.
The explanation that you heard from Councilman Carlisle in the committee sessions last week, as we taped this, focused a lot on economic development, about making it easier for developers or those relocating or starting businesses to do business here. And you've certainly been outspoken in your belief that first of all, we have to have some incentive for this, but in your belief that in some ways it may be too easy to get the incentives that are their reason for coming to local elected leaders in the first place. Is that an accurate assessment of where you are?
That's a very accurate assessment, because every chance I get to reemphasize that I am not against incentives. But Bill, I took a picture of something just a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. It was after the council meeting. I was on Union at the McDonald's, at Union and Florence. And there's a picture up there that says team members up to $13.50 an hour, shift leaders up to $17 an hour. So where we currently stand right now at $13 an hour for incentivized economic development projects, they are lower than what a position would be for some people at McDonald's. So from an economic development standpoint, I still haven't heard or been given clear examples of how this helps Memphis from an economic development standpoint. I go back and some of the comment that I made during the council meeting is the fact that Knoxville, Knox County, Chattanooga, and Hamilton County, those are not consolidated governments, but one would offer that they have done a better job of growing their economic database than Memphis has. So consolidation wouldn't necessarily propel us. I hadn't heard any arguments about consolidation would propel us ahead of those two cities, much less Nashville.
Do you think that having two governments, a city and a county government, do you think that it has held back the economic growth of the city?
At this point, no, Bill, because we have the Edge Board. So the Edge Board, as I recall at the time, I didn't think I was going to be on the city council when I recall hearing the discussions about that. The Edge Board was designed to take away the need for them to have to go before the city and the county legislative bodies in order to have economic programs approved. So if we're talking about economic development and the Edge Board is the one that's behind it, consolidation, it would seem to me, would have no bearing on that entity or that body.
Mm-hmm. So you're waiting on the case to be made for consolidation as ending a duplication of efforts for getting things straight in terms of the government that represents people here in Memphis and Shelby County.
And to me, in my estimation, there is not a lot of those Now, not to say that they don't exist, not to say that I don't think there's a lot of duplication of services. Now, one area where I think there may be, and I still go back to this whole idea about taxation without representation. From that standpoint, Memphians pay a Shelby County tax. The Shelby County Sheriff's Department is funded out of those taxes that Memphians, as well as everybody else in Shelby County, pays. So what would be the benefit of having perhaps the Sheriff's Department patrolling the entire boundaries of Shelby County, Tennessee? I think about Jacksonville, Florida. There's no such thing as a Jacksonville Police Department. It's the Duval County Sheriff's Department that patrols what would be the city limits of Jacksonville, as well as the rest of the county. So I can see perhaps those duplication of services being eliminated in the fact that you don't see just on regular patrol a sheriff's deputy patrolling the streets of Memphis, although Memphians pay the largest portion of the tax revenues that Shelby County government receives. So I can possibly see those duplication of services. But beyond that, I'm open to hearing what the other arguments are or the other examples of the duplication of services that we have between having a city and a county government.
So have things changed in the last 10 years since we last took a really close look at this? I mean, are we different locally than we were in 2010 when this was on the ballot?
Slightly, but I don't think any type of the differences have been to the detriment of Memphis, if you would. And I don't see how any changes of that would be to the benefit of Memphis. One of the things that I think that has been a little bit different is that, and this is strictly the perception of Martavius Jones, anecdotally based upon my perspective of things.
All right.
I think that we have a much friendlier or Memphis-friendly Shelby County Commission than we've had. It may have coincided with the fact that we have a Democratic-controlled county commission that we have not had in the past, that we hadn't had prior to 2014, if my recollection serves me correctly. So I think that bodes well for Memphis where we didn't have it. Having a more Republican-dominated Shelby County Commission tend to you tended to have more things that were tilted towards suburban interests versus the city of Memphis interests. I go back and I remember reading, and this may have been well before I was even on the school board bill, but I remember reading. I think it was written by Tom Jones. Tom, in his Smart City Memphis, wrote about the fact that when Mr. Julian Bolton was on the county commission, he raised some concern about the fact that Shelby County tax dollars were being used to build roads in the municipalities outside of Memphis, but none of that money was coming back to Memphis. And when he raised a stink about it, that's when the commission said, okay, well, we don't want to do it for Memphis, and they just totally eliminated it. But the fact that it existed and it didn't help Memphis, to me, that's just an example of how a different makeup of the county commission wasn't as Memphis friendly as the current county commission is.
As you know, from having been involved in this in 2010, there was a lot of discussion, and this is something that is pretty common to consolidation discussions across the country. The concept of having an urban services area versus a suburban or a rural services area in terms of services provided by a consolidated government. Is there value in doing consolidation to get that kind of a distinction or a reworking of the map of who gets what services?
I think the cat is already out the bag when we talk about those. When I recall coming back to Memphis, and I returned to Memphis in '99 after being away for about 13 years. And I can recall going out to some unincorporated parts of Shelby County and looking at some of the new subdivisions that were being developed. And one of the selling points on those signs was no city taxes, no city taxes. But out in those outlying areas where a general services area would normally be provided, or general level of services would normally be provided, they had all of the amenities that the city had. So generally what we're talking about would be the sewer lines, the utility services. Those are the basic things, sidewalks, if you would. Those are some of the basic things that or some of the amenities that you have in what would be an urban service area versus a general service area. But I would contend that those who already live in unincorporated parts of Shelby County, they've already received the benefits, the same level of benefits and services that we have in the city of Memphis. They just haven't had to pay for it.
All right. The court case we talked about at the top that you were a part of in 2010, it contested the dual referendum provisions in state law. In order to consolidate, this, but just for the audience, then the proposed consolidation charter that would come out of a charter commission must be approved by voters in the city of Memphis and by voters outside of the city of Memphis, but within Shelby County, in two separate referendums that happen to be on the same ballot. Is that still an open question, or did Judge Anderson over in federal court decide this in 2010?
I don't think it was decided. If I'm not mistaken, it went to the Court of Appeals. And I think that the
Sixth Circuit.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it went to the Sixth Circuit, but I think that it was dismissed without prejudice, whichever one allows it to come back. So it wasn't totally taken off the table. But I think that that's such an important element of this discussion that until that question is answered, I think that that's an exercise. This whole thing is an exercise in futility, because I still believe that the requirement of a dual referendum negates the whole principle behind one man, one vote. I think that question needs to be answered before we even go down this path of expending the energy that's required to come up with a charter commission, the time and the dedication that people who would serve on the charter commission would do, only to have the dual referendum requirement to strike it down. I think it's unfair that it exists, period. Particularly if, and here's an extreme example that I've always provided to make this argument. If you had all 650,000 people inside the city limits of Memphis to say yes, But everybody outside the city limits of Memphis, and I know this is a far-fetched example, everybody outside the city limits of Memphis caught the sleeping flu on election day, except one person who was out of town. That person came back in town and voted no. That one no vote would trump the will of 650,000 people in Memphis. So this is an extreme example, would never happen. But in concept, that's the effect of having a dual referendum.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's touch on a few other topics quickly with about probably 3 or 4 minutes left on the old Zoom clock here. On redistricting, you're a numbers guy, professionally, politically. The U.S. Census data that counts for drawing new district lines for the council has been out for about 2 weeks now. Tell me what strikes you and what you've seen so far and what that could mean for the structure of the council.
Well, you know what, Bill, when I went on the census, went on census.gov when it first came out. So I really haven't seen it for Memphis yet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I saw the actual growth in population, but if there was any breakdown as far as the demographics were concerned, I haven't seen that yet.
Right, and that's what everybody will be looking for. Is redistricting a little bit different on the council with you and several others in your second term and term limited? When you have term limited members making the call or helping to make the call on district lines in this once every decade process, does it make the considerations different since you're not trying to run for re-election?
I would hope that it doesn't, because I would hope that my political career would be defined not by what's convenient at the time. I always want to think about the future of Memphis. And so any type of direction that we would go in, it's not going to be about my thinking about what effect it's going to have on me being a term limited council member. It's going to be what's in the best interest of Memphis and what's going to serve Memphis best going forward.
Final point. The council is nonpartisan in the sense that council members don't run and win as Democrats or Republicans with partisan primaries. Should the council go to partisan primaries?
I think it should.
And do you plan on putting a proposal to that effect up anytime soon?
Yes. So what I plan on doing, Bill, is having that. I think it will be a convenient time to have that discussion when we are talking about doing the redistricting. I think there is an unanswered question too, as it relates to the structure of the council. I know that running in a super district like I had to do, and like my other super district colleagues have to do, that's one tiring endeavor. And we can't possibly, in my estimation, sufficiently cover the entire district all the time when we're talking literally half of Memphis. So what I think would be worthy of conversation would be going to single member districts, as well as having partisan primaries to determine who those council members are. So whether or not we're able to do so without any type, because I wasn't living here when the whole super district concept came into play. It's my understanding that there was a federal court case that was part of the settlement. Would we have to get permission from the court to go to all single member districts? I don't know, but those would be some of the discussions that I think would be forthcoming in the next couple of months.
All right, and again, as part of the redistricting discussion.
Yeah. So I think we should do it in just one fell swoop. Take care of everything all at once.
All right, quite an undertaking. Not just partisan primaries, but also single member districts. A discussion the county commission had several years ago. We've been talking with Memphis City Council member Martavius Jones. This week on WKNO's Behind the Headlines, why the city's strategy for dealing with homelessness does not include tent cities or camps for those in homelessness as seen in other cities. Our guests are Kelsey Johnson of Hospitality Hub and Ellen Roberts of Dragonfly. We'll also discuss the Hub's new women's shelter under construction where the old city auto inspection station was on Washington Avenue and the Hub's approach to homelessness. Listen on the podcast version of the show for an extended conversation conversation that is not part of the TV show. Subscribe to the Daily Memphian at dailymemphian.com. Subscribe to this podcast and our others at Google Play, iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. I'm Bill Dries. The Daily Memphian Politics Podcast is produced by Natalie Van Gundy.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.